Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the University of Michigan Medical School walkout. This is the white coat ceremony walkout because the students did not agree with the point of view held by the speaker. Let's unpack this case. Now, I've previously discussed this issue and what I think the implications are on Barry Weiss's Substack Common Sense, and so you can go read my thoughts there, but I thought it'd be helpful to kind of talk you through what happened and what do I think about it. So, what happened? There are two major important ceremonies in the life of a medical student. They're the bookends of medical school. One is the white coat ceremony. That's the ceremony where your family and friends come to see you put on that white coat for the first time. It's typically before the incoming first-year class. And you get the white coat, you take the oath, typically some modified Hippocratic oath. You put it on, they give you a pager, and they say, you're on your way to being a doctor. Then there's graduation. That's when you come back and you turn in that pager, and usually you throw it right back because you're sick of that pager. You want to break from it. Okay, they'll give you the pager again when you go to residency. But it's an important ceremony, I think, in medical school. It's when people embark on the path of being a doctor and they first take that commitment. Now, the University of Michigan has always had a way in which they picked the speaker for the white coat ceremony. And my understanding is that they have a panel. And this panel is comprised of faculty members and fourth-year medical students, and they decide which faculty member is best suited to give this talk. And this year they chose Dr. Kristen Collier. Dr. Collier is an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. She is, by all accounts, a beloved clinician and a thoughtful educator. She is somebody who directs the Spirituality and Medicine program. And she's published a number of papers, and I think she's well-liked among the students and graduating students and faculty, and they chose her to be this year white coat ceremony speaker. She does, however, have a personal belief, and her personal belief is she is pro-life. And I think that is in contrast with the majority of the students, particularly the incoming students at the University of Michigan, who I suspect they are, like myself, pro-choice. And the majority of the faculty are probably pro-choice at the University of Michigan. Dr. Collier is not. But what do we know about her beliefs? Well, she has been interviewed in a magazine. I found the link and I read the interview. And the interview was, I think, sort of some sort of religious sort of magazine kind of interview. In it, she's self-defined herself as pro-life. But she doesn't actually say where exactly she falls on the spectrum, whether or not she favors exemptions for particular cases such as rape, such as incest, the life of the mother, whether or not she favors changes in the law. She doesn't actually make all those points of view clear, how she feels about Supreme Court rulings. She doesn't make all that clear. She just states she's a pro-life person. In that interview, she also says that we are tolerant and embracive of so many forms of diversity at the university, particularly in academic medicine, except for religious diversity. That was something that she falls. And so she has a certain point of view. She talks a lot about conscientious objection, whether doctors have the ability to be conscientious objectors from medical procedures that they themselves may disagree with, and she has done some work in ethics around this space. So that's who she is as background. She was chosen for this talk, and things were, I think, going as they tend to go until the recent Supreme Court ruling. And so, of course, the Supreme Court recently overruled Roe v. Wade, returning that question to the individual states. And, of course, many states are going to take sort of draconian legislation in the wake of that ruling. The students, initially, when they find out that Dr. Collier is going to be the speaker, there's a petition that's circulated asking for a change in speaker. And that petition has a number of quotes from students. It garners a number of signatures, hundreds of signatures, but notably, not all of the students signed this document, but many of the students signed this document. And it says that, given the importance of this issue, this is an issue where literally lives are at stake, particularly the life of the mother in very dire situations, that they view that this choice would be inappropriate. The administration has a letter that they send out to the student body, sent by Marshall Runge, the dean. And the letter says that the white coat ceremony, it's not a time and place to have an abortion discussion. And by the way, it isn't. It never was, and I doubt it ever will be a time and place to have a discussion about the very, very polarizing issue of abortion. It's not going to be that time and place. It's a place to have a lecture that introduces people to the art of medicine, to remind them what it means to be a doctor. That's what it's for. It's, a sort of a broad talk that they have, few minutes, 10 minutes at most, and then they put the white coat on. And that's what people are there for. Let's be honest. No one's there for the talk. People are there to watch their son or daughter get the white coat put on. That's what the whole thing is really about. And it's a nice ceremony. And this letter makes it clear that Dr. Collier was chosen through the usual process, and She's not going to talk about controversial issues. The white coat ceremony has not been a place where we talk about these issues, and she has said she's not going to talk about controversial issues or divisive issues. So that's what the letter says. But, it still wasn't good enough. There still was the pressure to have the event canceled. Ultimately, the university also pointed out that they do not rescind invitations merely because somebody has a personal belief that is different from other people. They are tolerant of academic freedom and freedom of ideas, and they went ahead and kept her as the speaker. Then the video clip that went viral. She gets up there to speak. She starts making some general remarks, welcome, that sort of stuff, and people stand up and walk out. And it appears to be about half of the first-year class. Different news accounts say about half of the first-year class. And a number of friends and family members walk out in, I think, solidarity with those first-year class members. But notably, half the class stays. It's not everyone who walks out. Half the class also stays. And they listen to the white coat ceremony talk. And then she gives a lecture, and I think people can watch the lecture in full. Briefly, the University of Michigan made the lecture private after I pointed out that people could watch it in full. They have restored it, which is good because it's important that people can watch it. I watched the lecture in full. And what is the lecture about? It is a lecture that, turns out it has nothing to do with abortion. It doesn't mention abortion, it has nothing to do with abortion. It has to do with Dr. Collier's point of view, I think, if I can summarize, is that she believes that in the modern world, it is very easy and seductive to start to think of the patient as a mechanical being. We're the auto mechanics and they are a broken machine, and we can depersonalize that experience, and that leads to two bad things. One, a bad experience for the patient, and also it leads to burnout and a dehumanism among the faculty and staff. And she talks about a number of ways in which we can preserve focus on the patient and always remember above all else that it's a human being in front of you. And she has some sort of lovely quotes from Aristotle, etc. It's the kind of stuff that you would expect to be said at that ceremony, and I think it's well put and very thoughtful. And again, had nothing to do with the controversial topic. I always think it's important to think about the principle that's being set. So what is the principle here? This person holds a point of view about abortion that the students, the faculty, many people may disagree with. I get it. I disagree with it too. That issue is an issue that they believe is very important. It's an issue where life and death is at stake, and that if you happen to be wrong on this issue, it could lead to the death of a woman who needed to have an abortion but happened to be in a state where, it wasn't available to her. And it's such an important issue that they believe, I think, that this person is disqualified, not only from, I think, talking about that issue, but from talking about any other issue. And that, to me, is where I think it's a bit of a strong position. What does it really mean, In medicine, there are many, many issues. In fact, I would argue even the majority of issues, or perhaps even all issues, where life and death is at stake. And not even just medicine, many political issues where it has to do with the lives of other people. Let's talk about another issue, immigration. There are people who have a range of views on immigration, from favoring sort of very permissive immigration policies to very strict immigration policies. And you can imagine that people on one side of that issue feel that people on the other side are actually leading to the deaths of other people. For instance, somebody who needs to move here whose life is in danger based on where they are, but they can't move to this country. Ergo, something bad happens to them. They may even lose their life. That's an issue of life or death importance. Other issues fall that way too. School closure. I think many people who wanted schools closed, they felt like if schools were open, it would lead to the unnecessary death of many, many kids and many of their parents. And people on the other side of that issue, where I put myself, we believe that if you close schools, you will lead to the death of many children who are older because they will have had diminished upward mobility in their life. They would have had lower economic earnings, and they would have had fewer prospects, and there would be all sorts of collateral damage to society, which will result in loss of life. Many issues in medicine and in politics that are contentious mean lives are at stake. And what the students are doing in this choice, they're saying that if you hold the point of view on one of these many, many issues that I believe is extremely important and where lives are at stake, and I disagree with you, I will not hear your point of view on any other matter, because she's not talking about abortion. That's been conceded in the letter. She's not going to. To be honest, it has no place in a white coat ceremony. I never heard anyone bring it up in a white coat ceremony, and I don't think I ever will hear anyone bring it up in a white coat ceremony, because a white coat ceremony is not about picking these issues. It's about having some broad comments about what it means to be a doctor. She's not going to talk about it there, but they don't want to hear her about what it means to become a doctor, even though she is a doctor, and she likely has a lot of clever observations about being a doctor from many years of practice. And proof of that is that many people think so, because that's why they picked her to give the talk. They thought she would be the best person to do it. And her lecture, I think, is well done. It is persuasive. It's available online, and I think you can watch it and see for yourself. So what I want to know is the student's principle, where does it stop? Is there a limiting principle, or how far does it go? And I can imagine that if there's a nephrologist and the nephrologist is teaching you about the nephron and the loop of Henle, but that nephrologist happens to favor strict immigration policies, and you find that out because they gave an interview for some magazine once upon a time, will you skip the lecture on the nephron? If there's a cardiologist who was a proponent for opening schools or closing schools, or whichever one that you disagree with, would you listen to their point of view about Starling's curve on the heart? Where is the stopping principle here? And then my other question is, why is this limited only to faculty? The students are saying, we can't hear her thoughts on unrelated issue. This doctor, who is, by all accounts, a beloved physician at the hospital, that's why my fellow students who are older than me, a few years ahead of me, picked her, because she holds this point of view on this issue that we disagree with strongly. What about the patient who walks in, who holds many views you disagree with, perhaps even most political views you disagree with, and you get wind of that? How will you treat that person? Will you still provide care? I would hope so. But I think increasingly we've heard rhetoric over the last year, for instance, that if somebody doesn't make the vaccine choice that I think is right, should doctors be able to withhold care? And many years ago, I remember on rounds where I was with some young person, a trainee, and the patient was in a wheelchair. On the back of the wheelchair had a Trump-Pence sticker on that wheelchair. And the trainee and the patient got in a quarrel about Trump. And believe you me, I was not a fan of the Trump-Pence movement. Back in 2015, I was certainly no fan of the Trump-Pence movement. But I also thought it wasn't a good idea to get in a fight with the patient about this issue, because that's not the role of a doctor, to tell someone their views on every political issue and to engage in all these sort of things that were tangential to what we were there for, which I can't remember exactly, but was a consult that probably had something to do with hematology and or oncology, the specialty that we provide services for. So the reason I think the students' action is problematic is I think it is reflective of a broader view, that a broader sentiment, that we don't want to interact with someone who holds any view that we disagree with, if we believe that view and holding the wrong side of it can lead to bad consequences for other people. And what I think is that there is really no limit to that proposition, that everything in medicine, from our views of a new cancer drug to how vaccines should be deployed, and many things in politics, to immigration, to healthcare policy, to reimbursement, to abortion, to many other issues, these are all issues where people feel strongly, and they certainly do have implications on the lives of human beings and how many people live or die, the most important things in the world. The beauty of medicine is that many things we talk about have those implications. And I think it is inevitable that you will encounter colleagues, patients, faculty, trainees who disagree with you on some of these issues. And if you want to say that I don't want to listen to them proselytize on that issue they disagree with, even there I can kind of see where you're coming from. But if you want to say I don't want to engage with them on any issue, even if it's unrelated to that issue I disagree with, I think that principle has no end to it. And you're left, how can you engage with anyone? And it has a whole bunch of other negative externalities. One is that if there are two nephrologists and one person happened to have given an interview for a magazine that nobody reads in 19 Diggity, and the other nephrologist never gave that interview, but they have the exact same set of beliefs, you're only going to walk out on one nephrologist, not the other one. You're walking out on the person who happened to have aired their opinion somewhere, or you can find a hint of their opinion, which is strange because that's sort of just creating an incentive for everyone to keep all of their opinions to themselves on every issue, which I don't think is what anyone wants in a democratic society. I also think that, we have to acknowledge that on this issue, there is a range of opinions. And, I have my opinions, but there are people who disagree with me, and they're not 0% of the population. They're a sizable chunk of the population. How are we going to work with and interact with these patients going forward? And how are we going to work with our colleagues who disagree with us on these issues? So I guess I'm not sure that, and people say, well, walking out was a form of quiet protest, but the initial gambit was to cancel the talk or to get a different speaker. So the attempt was to cancel. It was only that the University of Michigan felt strongly that we do not rescind invitations for personally held beliefs. But I think a number of other universities may have canceled. And I think it's not quite canceling, but a number of universities would not have chosen such a person if this were to be announced as an issue when they were talking it through. It was a series of timing that, the Roe v. Wade overturning probably happened after they had picked her, but before she gave the talk. And that was probably, I think, what led this to be such a maelstrom. I do think that in medicine, I worry if we are training trainees with the most important thing, which is to realize that you have to be tolerant of people who have wildly different points of views on political issues, on social issues, on medical issues. You have to, insofar as you think it's productive, talk through those issues. But certainly, I think a ban that you can't talk about any other unrelated issues, I think that goes too far and will lead you to exclude many, many people. And that itself is a choice that will lead to the deaths of some people. Ironically, that if you were to push aside people who you disagree with on these issues, those people are not going to get as good medical care, and then lives may be at stake. So to some degree, all these issues are about life or death matters, and they all take on huge importance. So I was critical, I think, in my commentary on Common Sense that you can read, and I do worry that it is not a good message, and it's not a good attitude to have. I worry that it has no limiting principle, and I worry that this is the way in which the culture has gone, and the culture continues to go. And it's hard for people, I think, to say, hey, listen, I think, I agree with you actually on the issue, which I do. Actually, I do not agree with Dr. Collier, of course. I have the other point of view on this issue. But, we have to, if we are to make progress, I think we're going to have to try to persuade people. I don't think it's helpful, this tactic of, when you cannot achieve the political victories that you want, to find people who are really largely allies with you, which I suspect that in her portfolio of views, and she has a portfolio of views. This is one of her views, but her other views are on how we can help marginalized populations and all these other sorts of important social justice issues that I've seen her write about and comment about. She is, has a huge overlap of agreement with, I think, these first-year students, and that's probably why the fourth-year students picked her. But it's so easy to, attack people who disagree with you on some key important issues, even when there's huge overlap, and miss the fact that the political victories are not going to be happening when you walk out of the white coat ceremony. I think it's actually a very unproductive way to win the political issue. It's just going to create resentment from a huge swath of middle America who thinks that it's still a privilege to be a doctor, and part of what it means to be a doctor is you may encounter some ideas and points of view along the way that you don't agree with immediately, but being a doctor means you need to take a step back, have some distance, keep some distance, don't let it bother you, and focus on what you're trying to do, which is take care of the person, or to listen to what it means to be a doctor, which has nothing to do with abortion. In the white coat ceremony, her talk certainly didn't. You can listen to the talk. It was a talk about the automation of medicine and burnout, which is a talk that ironically I think that they may have benefited from, because that's still such an important issue. And you need to compartmentalize this a little bit. Becoming a doctor is always about some degree of compartmentalization. The doctor can never grieve for the person the same way that you will grieve for your loved one. Of course not. The doctor has to have a little bit of emotional distance to provide that objectivity. For the same reason we don't let, surgeons operate on their own child. They get another doctor to do that because you need some emotional distance. And you also need to be able to separate that there are people who need your care, who you need to take care of. And they will disagree with you, not just on one issue, on many, many other issues. And you need to put all of that aside and focus on doing what's right for that person in front of you. And so I think that the culture that thinks, it's acceptable to walk out on a white coat ceremony talk when it's been told that, she's not going to talk about abortion by the dean, merely because she has a point of view, which is actually kind of vaguely put. She just self-defines herself as pro-life, but she's not actually said explicitly, I think, in any interview that I could find, what she actually thinks on this issue in sort of detail. I think that's just too much, and you may reject so many important lectures along the way if you hold that point of view. So those are my thoughts on this issue. You know what to do if you like this. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Check out the essay on Common Sense. Until next time.